The man saw it first as a blur in the heat, a patch of gold and shadow lying unnaturally still beside the cracked riverbed. The wind carried the dry hiss of grass, the distant hum of insects, and something else beneath it, a silence that felt wrong. He walked closer, slow and careful, boots sinking into the soft dust. The shape became clearer, a lion, old and fading, stretched along the ground as though carved into the earth itself. His menere was thin and pale, tangled with dust. Flies circled his eyes. His ribs rose like branches under his hide. For a moment, the man thought he was too late. Then, a breath. Shallow, but there. The lion's chest lifted once, fell, and lifted again. The man exhaled softly, lowering himself to one knee. The air shimmered with heat, and the smell of dry blood and sand mixed together. He reached for his canteen, unscrewed the lid, and poured a thin stream of water into the dirt. The water darkened the sand beside the lion's muzzle, spreading like ink. A twitch, faint but unmistakable. The lion's nostrils flared, searching. "Easy now," the man murmured, voice low and steady. "It's all right." The lion didn't move further. But his ear turned toward the sound, a small flicker of life inside the stillness. That was enough. He left food that night, a few scraps from his pack, placed at a respectful distance. He didn't expect the lion to eat. Yet when he returned at dawn, the meat was gone, the prints of heavy paws pressed faintly into the sand. Days passed in quiet rhythm. The man kept coming back, each time leaving food, water, and silence. He began to recognize small changes, the lion's breathing less shallow, his head lifting when footsteps approached, the faintest glint in his eyes. Still, the animal kept his distance. His gaze held pride even in weakness, the same fire that had once commanded the savannah. One evening, the sky turned copper and violet. The man sat near the riverbed, watching the lion from afar. The old beast tried to stand. His front legs trembled, muscles quivering, but he managed it, half standing, menere stirring in the breeze. For the first time, their eyes met fully. No fear. No plea. Just quiet understanding between two beings who had both known solitude. The man spoke again, barely a whisper. "You're still a king." The lion's tail flicked once, slow and deliberate. Rain came days later, soft at first, then heavy. The scent of wet soil filled the valley. The man hurried through the downpour, fearing the storm might have taken the lion's last strength. But when he reached the clearing, he stopped in awe. There the lion stood, beneath the open sky, head raised, rain streaming down his face. His menere clung dark to his neck, his eyes alive with something fierce and ancient. Lightning flashed behind him, painting the moment in silver and shadow. He turned his head slightly, toward the man. Not a call, not a cry, only a look, deep and wordless, carrying the weight of everything that could not be said. Then, slowly, the lion began to walk, away from the riverbed, away from the man, into the greening plains where the storm was breaking. The man didn't follow. He only watched, rain dripping from his lashes, heart full of something quiet and sacred. The world smelled of life again. The dust had turned to mud, and tiny shoots of green were already pushing through. As the lion disappeared into the wild, a single, rough roar echoed from beyond the ridge, hoarse but alive, defying the silence that had once claimed him. The man smiled, his voice barely rising above the rain. "Go on, old friend." And the plains swallowed the sound, leaving only the rain, the river reborn, and a memory that would never fade. The rains had passed, leaving the valley breathing again. Grass pushed through the soft earth in tender shades of green. Birds returned, their calls bright and restless. The river that had been nothing but a scar of cracked sand now carried a thin silver ribbon of water, whispering through stones. Weeks had gone by since the lion disappeared into the storm. The man still came often, not out of habit, but out of quiet duty. He walked the same path each morning, carrying a small satchel, his eyes tracing the horizon. Some days, he saw nothing but the moving light of clouds. Other days, tracks. Heavy, familiar, shaped by strength returning. It was one of those mornings when he found them. Near the same riverbank where the lion had once lain dying, fresh prints circled the mud, deep, wide, and alongside them, smaller ones. 3 sets. Cub prints. The man crouched, pressing his palm beside them. The cubs' tracks were light, playful even, their patterns scattered as if they'd danced around their father. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. The old king had not vanished after all, he had come back, and not alone. He followed the tracks as far as he dared, careful not to disturb. They led to a grove of acacia trees, where the air smelled of rain and wildflowers. Then, through the tall grass, he saw movement, gold shapes flickering between blades of green. The lion stood once more beneath the sun. He looked stronger now, not young, but whole. His mane glowed with life again, his frame filled out by survival and purpose. Around him tumbled 3 cubs, their small bodies darting and tumbling in the grass. One pounced clumsily onto his tail, another climbed halfway up his leg before sliding off. The lion lowered his head and gave a soft, rumbling sound, not a roar, but a deep vibration that rolled through the earth. The cubs stilled immediately, pressing close to his legs. The sound wasn't a warning, it was a lesson, the voice of a father teaching stillness, as the wild once taught him. The man watched from a distance, his heart tightening in his chest. He did not move, did not call out. He knew this moment belonged to the wild alone. The wind shifted, carrying his scent across the grass. The lion's head turned slightly, eyes locking onto the man once more. Recognition flickered there. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other, one who had once saved, and one who had been saved. Then, the lion blinked slowly, as if in silent thanks, before turning back to his cubs. The man took a step back, his boots sinking into the damp soil. He felt no sadness in leaving, only a quiet fullness, as though something lost had found its place again. Later, as the sun began to fall, he sat by the river where it all began. The sky burned orange and red, mirrored in the shallow water. He could hear faint roars rolling across the plains, not desperate or broken this time, but strong and alive, echoing through the dusk. He whispered softly to the wind, "You kept your crown." The grasses swayed, the river hummed, and the sound of life moved through every corner of the valley. Somewhere beyond sight, the lion walked with his cubs, guiding them through a world he had nearly left behind. The man rose, slinging his satchel over his shoulder. The footprints he left in the mud would wash away by morning, but the memory, the sound, the look, the miracle of a second chance, would stay carved in him forever. As twilight deepened, the first stars blinked awake. The land was quiet again, but this time, it was the peace of balance, of life continuing where it was once thought lost. And far across the plain, a father's roar lifted into the night, not for help, not for pain, but for joy. Morning came with a hush that seemed to hold its breath. The valley shimmered under pale gold light, mist clinging to the lowlands like a veil. Dew glistened on every blade of grass, and somewhere in the distance, a faint call broke the quiet, the cry of young lions learning their voices. The man stood at the edge of a rise overlooking the plain. From this height, he could see the pride, small, moving shadows between the acacias. The old lion led them through the tall grass, his steps slow but sure. His cubs trailed close behind, 3 bursts of restless energy, their movements uncoordinated but full of life. It had been months since the man last saw them this near. He had learned to watch from a distance, blending into the wind. What once felt like caretaking had become reverence, a silent guardianship that asked for nothing in return. Down below, the lion paused. His ears turned, catching something unseen. The cubs froze, imitating him without understanding. The air shifted, faint hoofbeats trembled through the earth. A small herd of antelope grazed nearby, unaware of the quiet watchers hidden in the grass. The man's breath caught. He knew what this was. The cub's first lesson. The lion lowered himself, muscles rippling beneath his coat. His tail flicked once, a signal. 2 of the cubs copied him clumsily, bellies scraping the earth. The third, the smallest, fumbled and let out a soft grunt. The lion turned his head and gave a low growl, not harsh, but instructive, a father's voice reminding them to listen to the land. Minutes stretched. The wind shifted again. The antelope lifted their heads. The lion tensed, but he did not move yet. He waited, eyes narrowed, patient as stone. Then, with a sudden burst, he lunged. The cubs followed, half running, half tripping over themselves, their tiny roars lost in the rush of sound and movement. Dust exploded across the plain. The herd scattered, hooves hammering the ground. The man watched, heart pounding, as the old lion's strength flared once more. He didn't chase for the kill, not anymore. His role now was teaching. One of the cubs broke away and leapt too early, tumbling into the dirt, while another darted ahead, quick and fearless. It didn't matter that they failed. What mattered was that they tried, that life had returned to what was once dying. When the chase ended, the lion stood tall, panting but proud. The cubs circled him, tails flicking, chests heaving with excitement. The smallest one rubbed against his leg, and he lowered his great head to nudge it gently with his muzzle. A soft rumble passed between them, the sound of pride, of belonging. The man smiled faintly. The sight stirred something deep inside him, not joy exactly, but peace. He remembered the dying creature he had found months ago, lying silent by the riverbed. That memory felt like another lifetime now. The old lion had risen again, not as a shadow of what he was, but as a father, a teacher, a king reborn through his young. Clouds drifted overhead, breaking the sunlight into patches of gold. The man stayed until the pride disappeared into the grass. He didn't follow. He had no need. Some stories, he knew, were meant to be witnessed only once, to see proof that the wild could heal itself if given the chance. As he turned to leave, a sound stopped him. A roar, strong, resonant, rolling through the valley like thunder. It wasn't a call of dominance, nor of warning. It was something older, a declaration that the cycle had begun again. The man stood still, eyes closed, letting the sound wash over him. When it faded, the plain fell silent once more, bathed in light and the whisper of wind through grass. He smiled, adjusted the strap on his shoulder, and began the walk home. Behind him, unseen but eternal, the lion and his cubs moved through the wild, their future written not in struggle, but in survival. And far across the plains, the echoes of that roar lingered like the memory of a promise kept. Years had passed since the rains first returned to the valley. Seasons had come and gone, green turned to gold, and gold to dust again. The man had not walked this path in a long time. His hair had silvered at the temples, the lines around his eyes had deepened, carved by sun and time. Yet his steps carried the same purpose as before, quiet, steady, drawn by something he could not name but could always feel. The valley greeted him with silence. The river, once dry, now murmured softly through a narrow channel. Acacia trees stood tall again, their leaves whispering in the wind. But it was the emptiness he noticed first, no sign of movement, no distant roar rolling across the plains. He kept walking until he reached the familiar bend in the riverbank, the place where it all began. The same ground where he had once found the old lion lying motionless, half buried in dust. Now the earth was green, alive. The air smelled of rain and wildflowers, not death. He stood there for a long time, hat in hand, letting memories gather around him like shadows. He remembered the lion's eyes, old but unbroken. The first twitch of life, the first step, the roar that once carried through a storm. Those sounds lived in him still, echoing in the quiet of his chest. Then he saw them. Far across the plain, three figures moved, sleek, strong, and golden in the late light. Lions. Younger, leaner, but bearing the unmistakable mark of the one who came before them. The largest male had a menere of dark gold, streaked with the same pale strands the old king once wore. Two lionesses followed close behind, moving in perfect rhythm beside him. The man's breath caught. His heart seemed to slow and steady all at once. He didn't move closer. He didn't need to. The sight alone was enough, proof that the legacy lived on. The old lion was gone, but his blood, his spirit, his strength had carried forward into these plains. The lions paused near the river. The male lifted his head, nostrils flaring as though sensing something beyond scent, a memory, perhaps, or a presence carried by the wind. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the distance. The same steady gaze, the same quiet power. The man smiled faintly. "You remember," he whispered. The lions did not run. They only stood watching, calm and curious. Then, with a flick of the male's tail, they turned as one and moved toward the horizon, their shapes melting into the amber grass. The man exhaled slowly, lowering himself to sit by the water's edge. The river glimmered with the colors of evening, orange, rose, and a deep violet that marked the end of day. He picked up a smooth stone and turned it between his fingers, feeling the coolness of it. Above him, a single hawk circled, its cry stretching thin across the sky. He thought of the lion's journey, from hunger and solitude to strength and legacy. And he thought of his own, a man who once came to help, and found instead a lesson that would last a lifetime. As the sun dipped lower, he whispered softly, "You were never mine to save. You only needed time." The breeze stirred, carrying the scent of grass and rain. Somewhere far away, a faint roar answered, distant but clear, rising like a promise through the twilight. The man closed his eyes and listened. When he opened them again, the plains had darkened, and the first stars had begun to appear. He stood, brushed the dust from his hands, and took one last look at the horizon, the place where the old lion's children had disappeared. Then he turned back toward the path home, leaving only footprints by the river and the sound of water whispering through the dark. The valley kept its silence, but within it, something eternal stirred, the quiet breath of a story that would never truly end. Years passed quietly, folding one into another like waves over sand. The man no longer walked the valley often. Age had slowed his steps, but not his memory. Each evening, When the wind drifted through his open window, he could almost hear it again, the faint, distant sound of a roar carried through time. He lived now in a small house on the edge of the reserve. From his porch, he could see the plains stretch wide beneath the horizon. Grass moved like an endless ocean. Herds came and went. The world continued its rhythm, life feeding life, the circle unbroken. Yet every sunset brought him back to that single story, an old lion, half dead by a riverbed, and the silent pact that changed them both. Sometimes young rangers visited him, new faces, full of energy and questions. They had heard rumors, stories told in campfires or whispered among the staff. "Is it true?" they'd ask. "That you once saved a lion who came back with cubs?" He would smile faintly, eyes distant. "I didn't save him," he'd reply. "He saved himself. I just gave him time." They would listen quietly, expecting more. But he always left the story unfinished, because the truth was not in what he did, but in what the lion became after. One evening, when the sky burned red and gold, he took a slow walk down to the river. His cane sank lightly into the soft earth. The same path, though the world around it had changed, trees taller, grass thicker, the air alive with sound. The land had healed. At the bend where he once knelt beside the dying lion, he stopped. The water shimmered under the fading light. A herd of antelope grazed nearby, heads lifting and lowering in quiet rhythm. And then, a movement across the far bank. A lion emerged from the tall grass. The man froze, heart steady but full. This one was different, young, strong, but with a mane streaked by faint silver. The way he moved, slow and deliberate, carried the same gravity as the one before. The lion walked to the water, lowered his head, and drank. The ripples spread across the surface like time folding back upon itself. The man whispered, "So, it continues." The lion lifted his head, droplets falling from his muzzle. Their eyes met across the narrow stream. No fear, no threat, only recognition, ancient and wordless. The lion blinked slowly, then turned away, disappearing once more into the golden grass. The man stood there for a long time, the sound of his breathing mingling with the song of insects and the low hum of the river. He felt no sadness, no longing, only peace. The story had come full circle. The old lion was gone, but his blood still roamed free, his spirit echoing in every roar that crossed these plains. As twilight deepened, the first stars appeared, scattered like dust above the darkening sky. The man turned to leave, his cane tapping softly against the earth. Behind him, the river murmured on, carrying with it the memory of everything that had been, loss, survival, trust, and quiet redemption. When he reached the ridge, he looked back one last time. The valley glowed beneath the moonlight, vast, eternal, untouched. Somewhere far away, the wind shifted. A single roar rolled across the distance, deep, resonant, and full of life. It was the same voice that had once thundered through a storm, reborn again in a new king. The man smiled through the quiet, his words barely a whisper. "You kept your kingdom." He turned toward the horizon, where sky met earth, and the night gathered around him like a gentle tide. The roar faded into silence, not an ending, but an echo that would live forever in the land, in the wind, and in the heart of the one who had once believed that mercy could bring a king back to life. And so the story of the lion, and the man who waited, became part of the valley's breath, carried endlessly on the wind.